Howdy, y'all. It's Tim. So, recently I've been going through a discipleship study with a mentor named Steve Reed. And this last week we went over a lot of the attributes of God. And there's so many, amazing attributes. Like, he's omnipotent, he's all powerful, he's omnipresent, he's everywhere. But going through that made me think about this old video, not that old, but video by a clinical psychologist named Jordan Peterson, where somebody asked him the question, does he believe in God? So let's watch that real quick.
I think this is why it's bothered me to answer this question. It's like, well, what right do I have to say that, to make that claim? I believe in God. Well, what's the claim? Is that the claim that I'm a good person somehow? Because you'd think that if you believed in God, actually, like seriously, that you'd be a good person, like right now. Because, well, for obvious reasons, I would think. And so if that hasn't happened in some sort of miraculous sense, so that you're the best person you could possibly imagine being on an ongoing basis, and then terrified of deviating from that path in a serious manner, then I don't see why you have the right to say that you believe in God.
Dang, that's pretty convicting. So, Jordan Peterson makes some pretty big claims there, even though I'd slightly disagree with him. I think he has a solid point. So if you really believe that God is omnipresent, there's a Psalm 139 that says, "Where can I go to escape your presence?" This is David talking. And he describes all these places, going all the way up to heaven, going all the way to hell, all over the earth, into the midst of very darkness. He cannot escape the presence of God. So God is everywhere. If you believe that, along with God being a just judge and him being holy, if you really believe that in the very depth of your soul, you would not sin. If you really believe that, you wouldn't sin. Never. And yet, 1 John 1:9 says, "He who claims to be without sin, the truth is not in him." Or I guess that's 1 John 1:8, excuse me. But still, point is the same. We still struggle with sin. So how do we balance these two things? There was a father in Mark who had that very same struggle. So let's turn there. So this is in Mark 9. Now, a little bit of pre-context. Jesus and three of the disciples, Peter, James, John, his trusted three, they were just up on the mountain and they experienced the very presence of God, where God literally told them, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." They got to see Moses and Elijah somehow. I don't know how that's even possible, but they did. So oftentimes we forget about the disciples, the other 9 that were left down below. So starting in verse 14, after they had just experienced this transfiguration, it says, "When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes disputing with them." So if you can imagine the 9 disciples being down there going, "Man, those 3 favorites are always getting picked." So they're down there and they're actually trying to do ministry without Jesus and on their own terms, if you think about it. So when the whole crowd saw him, starting in verse 15, they were amazed and ran to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you." So this is the father. "He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground and foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't." He replied to them, "You unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How much longer will I put up with you? Bring him to me." So they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening to him?" Jesus asked the father. "From childhood," he said. "And many times was thrown into fire or water, trying to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can, everything is possible for the one who believes. Immediately, the father of the boy cried out, I do believe. Help my unbelief. So, that, I believe, should be our heart. If it were up to us in our own terms, we can never believe in God. Like, our minds cannot really wrap our head around that. So, it's crazy. Not really, but you need God to believe in him. So, continuing on, when Jesus saw that a crowd was quickly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. Then it came out, shrieking and throwing him to terrible convulsions. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, he's dead. But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him up, and he stood up. After he had gone into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? And he told them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer. So, there's another Bible passage. It's Romans 12. And it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is. So, like I mentioned earlier, our mind on its own cannot comprehend who God even is, much less get to know him personally. So that's why Paul says in Romans, be transformed. Our mind has to be transformed by God in order to start changing it, to grasp these things and change our lives. Because Jesus wants to save us, but he also wants to transform us too. That's why he said, if you were to follow him, you must deny yourself. So it's not like, oh, I'm smart enough to comprehend these concepts. So I believe Jordan is still struggling with this idea, because he's trying to understand it on his own terms. Like, he's like, if I think hard enough, I might be able to understand who God is. And actually, we can't think hard enough for the rest of our lives to understand who God is. So we must deny ourselves, say, all right, I can't do this on my own. Pick up our cross. So it's like we're actually taking up our faith and belief in Jesus and following him. So it's like, in Jesus, when earlier he said, if, like, come to me, all who are weary and heavy burden, take my yoke upon you. So it's like, it's not like we're carrying the cross, it's like knitting, gritting through it, pulling up ourselves by our bootstraps. It's like a yoke is meant for two animals. So it's like taking up your cross means you're doing it right there with Jesus through the power of him. So this week I would just encourage you, like Jesus also says that if you abide in me, you will produce fruit. And then James also says, like, faith without works is dead. So I'm not saying those things save us, for sure. But there should be evidence in our life of our belief in God, in these things. If you're not seeing those evidences, then I would highly recommend you, instead of like trying to be on the ground where the other 9 disciples were, trying to do it like your life on your own, go up on the mountain, spend some time with Jesus, and then he'll reveal to you who he is. We gotta spend that time. I feel like often in these Devo series, that's what we always come back to, spending the time. It takes discipline. I'll pray you guys have it this week. Love y'all. See y'all.